Somebody is talking about the quarterback position, and when that person talks, we listen. What did he say? What does it really mean? We'll tell you all about that coming up next on the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first and listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Hi, I'm Stephen Willis. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, and Chris Lowe is talking about the quarterback competition. We're going to go over that in just a second. Also on the show today, we're going to talk about the cornerback room, and John Gillespie from the Grove Report will be stopping by to talk about the Elite 11 and Damon Williams and all that stuff. We might just kind of back and forth it a little bit as well, but we go back. Chris Lowe is talking about the quarterback competition, and this is the headline. And full disclosure, I went to the ESPN site, and this article is nowhere to be found on the ESPN site. The only place I found it was on the On3 site, which tells me that maybe they had him on a podcast and it was an interview type situation. But the headline is, dethroning Jaxson Dart as Ole Miss quarterback will be difficult, ESPN says. Again, I'd seen nothing on the ESPN site. I think it was just Chris Lowe said that, and since he works for ESPN, they do that. The crux of the article was this, though. Dart was good enough and consistent enough in the spring that it is going to be difficult for anyone to unseat him, Lowe wrote. What he did better than anyone else was get the ball into the end zone, and that is the ultimate measure of a quarterback. But to say Saunders, especially with all of his experience and athleticism, is too far behind to catch Dart would be premature. And who's to say that both quarterbacks won't contribute in some form or fashion in 2023? Dart may be the guy for Ole Miss right now, but Kiffin is the type of coach to select the quarterback who is best suited to win right now. Ole Miss plays in the rough SEC West. All right. That is basically what they said, and whenever you read it and actually take it all in there, he really said what we've been talking about for 3 months. Nothing really has changed. The decision was made today, the first snap against Mercer had to be made today, that decision would be Jaxson Dart. Nobody is disputing that. That is almost just a given at this point. But I do want to say this, and I put all of that up there to say this. And Chris Marshall being dismissed from the team was a major, major decision for Jaxson Dart. He is the type quarterback that needs to perform well outside the hash marks. He needs big-time playmakers, Jonathan Mingo, Malik Heath. He needs people on the outside that can tote the mail, can give what needs to be given. Chris Marshall being gone adds question marks to the outside and moves the strength of the team to the inside and at running back. And if we're just being honest with ourselves, a quarterback that can run the zone read and throw the ball over the middle of the field to Michael Trigg to best utilize him, or Caden Priestcorn, is probably Spencer Saunders. Now, in fall camp, we have to go through all of that. There's so much water that has to go under the bridge. But if you want me to give opinions, and honestly, that's what we do, this Chris Marshall situation was a horrible thing for Jaxson Dart. He made so many strides through the spring. Chris Marshall flashing. They worked together relatively well in the Grove Bowl, but at the detriment of the middle of the field. So in the fall, and this is more urgent than it ever has been, especially if Ole Miss does not get Keon Coleman, which I said yesterday, this is a big boy recruitment. This is a large number. This is somebody that is going to some place that needs him. This is somebody looking to make something and to find his value and go there. And if you want this player, you're going to have to pay. And that's what they say in the comments. I think it was JC23 in the comments yesterday. Talked about, it's like, you can have him if you're willing to pay for him. And that is absolutely true. This is a big boy recruitment. If Ole Miss does not get him and the wide receiver room in the fall goes into what we have right now, which is absolutely possible, it's disadvantaged Jaxson Dart. I do not care what Chris Lowe said, because at the bottom, that line, that Lane Kiffin is going to play the guy that he ultimately can win with in the tough SEC West, that becomes a really serious question mark. And if you are going to be a team that relies on Quinshon Judkins in that running game, you want a quarterback to tote the mail as well and utilize your weapons, Michael Trigg over the middle of the field, Caden Priestcorn, and you have outside guys that can kind of do good things, but they are not going to be the focal point of this offense. Either Jaxson Dart has a ton to work on in the fall to get ready to go before Mercer gets here. Or, it might be advantage to Spencer Saunders. It is a very weird situation because that article that they put out that we showed on here, it is basically confirmation bias for whatever position you have on the quarterback position room. If you thought Jaxson Dart was the guy, that article confirmed in your mind that Jaxson Dart's the guy. If you thought Jaxson Dart might slip and is in danger of losing this in the fall, that article gives you just as much that. Probably the only nugget of information that was actually useful or different or something like that was saying that Saunders and Dart was ahead of Walker Howard. I love Walker Howard. I think Walker Howard, if this team is 3-4 after 7, I think it's Walker Howard watch playing quarterback regardless of who is playing quarterback. Because you want those reps. You want to get ready to maximize 2024. That absolutely happens. But if you look at the field and you just divide it up into quadrants, let's just say you go 4 across and 2 deep, okay? So there's 8 zones to where a quarterback can hit. Jaxson Dart does a decent job at 6 of them. The deep middle, the outsides. That's 2 deep. That is 2 on the outside, 2 on the outside. But the position where the linebackers are playing, okay, where they play, that has been a blind spot for him moving forward. And we always say this, that he needs to fix this to get us to where we all want to be. This isn't anything negative on him. This is something that he can fix. This is part of his development. I think he's 20 years old. He's got time, or 19 years old, or something like that. He's got time to get it done. But it's important that it gets done. And it's also important that you recognize that it needs to get done. And if he does that, he has all the opportunity in the world to throw for 3,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, and be in the NFL this time next year. Again, I told you, I'm a huge Jaxson Dart fan, but I'm also going to be real about what he needs to work on and what this offense needs. Good players, you see it in soccer all the time. The best players might not play together. It's like the Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard thing from way back in the mid-2000s. They just couldn't play together. They stylistically didn't fit. So while those were the 2 best midfielders in all of England, they couldn't play together. So it's about finding what is the correct fit for the offense to get the best results possible. And we'll see exactly how that goes. In the second segment of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about the cornerback room, give our post-spring report card on that, and we'll have John Gillespie coming up in segment 3 from the Grove Report as well. But right now, I do want to tell you that this show is brought to you by Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious snack, but don't want all of that sugar and calories, then you need to be tasting the best tasting protein bar ever built. You got to try this. If you're like me and you want to make healthier snack choices, but you don't want to compromise on taste, not even a little bit, I've got just the thing for you. Built Bars and Built Puffs. They are healthy and amazing. Seriously, they're so amazing. You won't even think they're good for you. You got to try this. Seriously. What makes them so good? Well, for starters, they're all covered in 100% real dark chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. I'm not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar and not like a protein bar. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 17 grams of protein. But now, you don't need to wait to get a box. For years, we've been talking about ordering Built Bars at Built.com using promo code LOCKEDON15. But now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club, while you can still get your specialty flavors at Built.com. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today. Go to the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, and coconut puffs. If you're close to Sam's Club, though, you can run in and grab a 13-bar box. I actually have 2 of them in the fridge right now with our hit flavors, Brownie Batter Puff and Churro Puff. You can thank me later. Built does phenomenal things. And like I said, all the specialty flavors are available online at Built.com as well. So check them out. You will not regret it. They're delicious. They seriously are. Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Every day is tomorrow on the show. Derek Vandegrift talking about the Ole Miss Auburn series, talking about Rebels in the minor leagues. I know the baseball season has not gone the direction you want it to, but we're going to try and figure out angles and ways to get some information out about Ole Miss baseball. And I think tomorrow we're going to look at the Rebels in the minor leagues. Like Tim Elko is just hitting bombs right now, like 7 home runs in a month down in A-ball. And I think Gray Kessinger had a 3-home run game for the AAA Sugarland Space Cowboys, the Houston Astros affiliate. So we'll talk about that tomorrow as well on the show. Right now, I do want to give our post-spring grade on the cornerback room at Ole Miss. Now, cornerbacks got hit pretty hard in the offseason. Davis Nigmanoson was a split starter with Miles Battle, and both of them have gone. They both hit the portal and gone. The other starter was Deantre Prince. He's back. So that side of the ball is probably pretty well taken care of, if that makes sense. Now, to fill that spot that they left, Zamari Walton was recruited from Georgia Tech to come in to play the cornerback position. He's a big, tall, 6'3", rangy guy, Miles Battle type cornerback. So you figure the starting lineup is about where you need it to be. The other one that's kind of a slash player that could play safety or corner is John Saunders Jr., who played at Miami of Ohio last season. So honestly, that's 3 to play 2. So that's probably in pretty good shape. And we still don't know entirely about the status of Deshaun Gaddis. Whenever players arrive in June, it would not surprise me at all if Gaddis showed up with them. That would provide a 2 deep at the cornerback position and honestly would affect the grade. But the fact that we don't know what's going on, we'll have to see what's going on. Jarrell Stinson is in this group as well. There's a couple of corners that have been moved to safety. We'll talk about the safety position tomorrow. But 3 to play 2 is pretty good shape. It's a pretty good shape. And you look at the safety position with like Ishim Young and Ladarius Tennyson and those guys, and that lets you know, okay, it could be there. Although I have honestly more questions about safety than corner at this point, even though we had 4 safeties on the field and have recruited safeties for years at an obscene rate. I have more questions about that than corner. Zamari Walton, nice upside. His ball skills and interception rate probably isn't at the level that we want it to be, but he plays a good cornerback position. He's physical, and we'll have to see what he does. Deantre Prince is due for a Senquez Golson type breakout year. I'm expecting fairly high things from Deantre. And John Saunders, if he plays corner, he's another one that's 6'3", 6'4". We're talking about length. And if you look in the back, there's really tall, lengthy players, like, even at safety with like Taylor Groves. But we'll see exactly how this goes. Now, it's a situation to where you want more. And everybody's going to want more because one proven returning cornerback is scary. I get that. I understand that entirely. But Zamari Walton is a good player. I saw him get a pick, I think against Virginia. John Saunders played really well against Kentucky, so that's against an SEC team. Walton has played against Georgia every year. They've been a little bit of a whipping boy to the Bulldogs. So we do have players that have played against SEC caliber teams in the past few years. So I'm interested in like Jarrell Stinson. He's a player in high school that made plays. He flashed a little bit. He was, he's going to be, I think, a sophomore or something like that this year. but he's from Alabama, so I'm interested to see what he does. I think the first play on his highlight was a super hit stick type hit. And whenever a defensive back, especially a cornerback, does that, it kind of gets my attention a little bit. But this is something you need to keep in mind, especially in this defensive backfield. And honestly, as in a little case with linebackers, because I do think safeties and linebackers and cornerbacks, that is all a fluid situation with this defense this year. Now, that Husky type role that's going to play safety, I do think like Centarian Perkins and a couple players have a chance to move back, and then you have Tennyson and you have Iseem Young can move down. I don't know how that place will look. At corner, like John Saunders can play corner, but he's also at a free safety because we're trying to figure out how to replace A.J. Finley. Because if you want questions, if you want scaredness, the safety position room, while there's players that can get it done because we've recruited like heck there, you still lost both starters. And A.J. Finley played a lot of ball for this team. So we'll see what happens. I think Prince and Walton and the way that the defense is going to change, it's not going to be so zone dependent this year. It's going to be some man principles. I think we'll see exactly how that goes. But, Deantre Prince's probably highlight of his career was picking off Joe Burrow in 2019. And I think he had a couple of picks that year to where he actually flashed before he ended up having to go to JUCO for a year and come back. So we will see exactly how this goes. Again, the cornerback position, we need to find out about Deshaun Gaddis. We need to see exactly where he sits. Is he coming in June or is he not? Because he is the difference between this defense, this cornerback room being a C and being a B+ or B-. That is probably the difference of Deshaun Gaddis. He's a former all-conference player in Conference USA at North Texas. But Zamari Walton and John Saunders, they're absolutely good pickups. DeJohn Anthony, he is somebody that's probably going to get brought in and played safety. Like I said, there's questions on this team right now at safety. Probably that is the most question-filled position group on the team. Now, you're going to hear some podcasters and everybody talking and giving their analysis of it to where every position has question marks. And that's not entirely true. You might not be where you want to be, but that's not entirely true. When we talk about the safety room, we're going to talk about real questions because you have Iseem Young and Ladarius Tennyson, both of which are questionable in pass coverage as being one of your key contributors in that room. My least favorite room on Ole Miss's football team is the safety room right now. Like I said, I'm not saying that it can't be done. I'm not saying that they won't do it. I'm not saying that good players are not going to be there. I'm saying there's a reason they're recruiting a bunch of safeties. Period. They're trying to get this team to where they want to be. And the reason they're recruiting Keon Coleman right now is because they had constructed this offense in a certain way, and removing that one piece probably takes it down 2 or 3 levels. So they have to recruit that piece, or else the whole thing is going to change. It turns into a crash course to figure out exactly what needs to be done. So just pay attention with that as well. Anyway, when we come back, John Gillespie of the Grove Report is going to stop by talking on Elite 11. Probably going to talk Chris Marshall. We're going to talk basketball. We're just going to have a conversation a bit. So anyway, stick around. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Do us a favor, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the bell for notifications, and of course, comment and upvote the video itself. We'd appreciate it very much. Also, look at our subtext community. Whenever we have little pieces of information, like we did about Wes Flanagan and potentially Alan Flanagan a couple of weeks back, we generally put it there first. So that's something you can do. There's a free trial at the moment. There's not a lot of information, but it's a good place for you to interact with the show. I'm here with John Gillespie from the Grove Report. It's been a couple of weeks because life has happened, but John was at the Elite 11. He saw Damon Williams throw the ball. How you doing, John?
I am doing well. Like you said, life has happened the last couple of weeks, but thankful and blessed to be back on the show today and talk a little Ole Miss sports. And yes, I was at the Elite 11, and that was an experience.
Yeah, this will be your first appearance on the show broadcasting at 1080p, Before we were a 720p production, but we have since upgraded since then.
Well, I've always said I have a face for radio, so maybe they won't hold that against me.
Yeah, somebody was talking about, hey, Steve, will you put me on TV? Even though, I'm not the most attractive person. I was like, if attractive was the problem, I would be doing radio. This would be an audio-only podcast. So obviously, yeah. But what was your first impressions of Demond in Oxford?
Well, I think a lot of times, so obviously I did talk to him after the fact. So I'll start there first. This was my first one-on-one conversation with him, in person, I should say. And I was struck by how level-headed he is. I think I'll start there because I think that's an important trait, especially at his position. Gave really good answers. I talked to his dad some as well while we were there. But athletically, I think he was the best or at least the second best quarterback on the field that day. I mean, we talked some on the sidelines while we were watching him, and his off-platform drills were really fun to watch. I mean, you could tell that that's what he enjoys the most. And so that was something that kind of caught my eye. And that, and two, just his calm, cool demeanor a little bit, which, I mean, obviously it's just a camp. So, I mean, it's a little bit different than game action. But ball looked good out of his hands, and how he handled himself in the midst of competition against some other really talented quarterbacks who were there, I think spoke really highly of him.
Yeah, and I think people need to understand whenever we're looking at Demond and talking about his game, this camp environment, like you said, playing football is where he actually shines. He is the rare player that combine stats doesn't necessarily translate, but whenever it's 11 on 11, he can really shine.
Yeah, and I think he looked good. I mean, even in that camp setting, but I do think you're right. I mean, looking at more of a structured, quote unquote, football type setting, whether it be 7-on-7 or a normal game, you can tell there's a difference there, right? I mean, it may not fully jump off. I mean, because he's not the biggest guy, that kind of thing. But it may not jump off the page at a thing like Elite 11. But to me, I was still impressed. But also, I was keyed in on him pretty much all day, just kind of watching how he did and everything. So, but yeah, I mean, overall, I was impressed, and he was a good interview as well.
Yeah, and I believe he got waitlisted. He did not get the finals invite immediately, but was waitlisted. They've only invited 6 players. They're going to invite 20, and I think they have 2 camps left. So they're going. Mm-hmm. There's still an opportunity for him to get an invite potentially as well. Now, let's change gears just a little bit and kind of discuss the Chris Marshall situation and what are you hearing in Oxford?
So, specifics as to what the team rules were that were broken, I don't feel comfortable saying anything specific because I've heard a few different conflicting things, but I think at the end of the day, what we do know is that team rules were somewhere broken, right? Whatever those may be. And apparently it was either egregious enough or a repeated offense enough to where he's no longer on the roster. So I know that you and I have talked, and you've talked, and I've written even outside of this setting that he was going to be a key piece in that room this fall, right? I mean, just talent-wise, we thought that the potential was, definitely there. But now, I think the question that's on a lot of people's minds is, okay, where does Ole Miss go now? And he's not a very experienced kid. I mean, he hasn't been in the game as long as some of these other transfer portal targets may have been. But that's still a blow that I think a lot of people weren't necessarily expecting. But I do think there's potential there. One, I think there's potential on the roster for Ole Miss to be still fine in that room. But two, I think there are potential targets as well that we'll see as the offseason evolves that could end up in Oxford. And I'm sure there's one in particular that we'll probably talk about here in a minute.
Yes. And it's a very important one for this reason. And I'm probably going to be the only podcast covering Ole Miss that's harping on this. But Chris Marshall, the person that he hurt the most whenever he left the team and that hole that got put on the roster is Jaxson Dart, a quarterback that throws the ball outside the hash marks in need of a big-time receiver to stand out. He doesn't work the middle of the field. And right now the strength of this offense is the middle of the field players, both tight ends and running backs. I think this is a problem for Jaxson if they don't get Keon Coleman, who we're going to talk about in a minute.
Yeah, no, I agree there. And, obviously I think this is another big visit for Kiffin and company. One, just because he's a good player, but two, because of the recent news that we just talked about, having to have something there that, can kind of feel, regardless of how big the void is. I mean, that's another body that's no longer in that room, right? So, I mean, there is legitimately some form of void. So yeah, I mean, I think this is a big deal, like you said, for that reason, but also just as the news situation has developed.
Now, what all do you know about Keon Coleman?
I have not watched a ton of Big Ten football, but I have seen his stat line and what he was able to produce this past season and his measurements and blah, 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 things like that. So, from that perspective, I mean, I think he's a very talented player. Now, you've probably watched more than I have from that perspective.
Yeah, he's a receiver that has a decent catch radius. He works well in a crowd. Separation, that could be a separation issue, but he is athletic enough to actually do it and to catch nearly 800, 900 yards worth of receiving yards at Michigan State, which is essentially running the Alabama offense from 2011. That's an impressive deal as well.
Yeah, no, and that's something that he exploded. Well, I don't know if exploded is the right word, but saw more playing time and took advantage of it last year, right? I mean, he had a really good season a year ago. Now I'm not. Your strength is definitely much more seeing those kind of things, whereas mine is okay. I'm a very numbers and stats oriented person, and I think that's why we complement each other well, is because you see the physical side of it a little bit more than I do. But yeah, no, I can see that for sure, and I think that this is a visit that Kiffin and the staff will be really pulling out the bells and whistles a little bit to try to say, hey, you've got a shot to really make a big impact here in the SEC.
Yeah, and I expect them to make a dent in the Grove Collective war chest for this one. I've heard, like, the amounts I've heard are just absolutely ridiculous. That doesn't mean it's true. That's just the rumors and gossip that people are saying. But I do expect Ole Miss to pony up a little bit on this one, because it's obvious the way Lane Kiffin was building this offense before with Chris Marshall and everything, the way it was being constructed, and the one piece that couldn't mess up for it to be the free-flowing, well-oiled machine that he was hoping it would be is the one that he had to let go. So that's the reason I think there's a desperation, a little bit of attempt to try and conserve what was being built in the spring.
Yeah. No, I totally agree there. And, that's something that I know took a lot of fans by surprise, or maybe not necessarily surprise, but I don't know. They weren't happy about it. Okay. We'll just say that. Weren't happy with the development. So anything that can be brought in quickly to kind of salve that wound a little bit, they'll be pleased with.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's change gears just a little bit before I let you go. Let's move to the hardwood. I know we're still talking about basketball in May. This is a weird development for Ole Miss, but we are. Alan Flanagan entered the transfer portal. He's the son of Wes Flanagan, the nephew of Jason Buck Flanagan. And it looks like the signs are directing where he's going to come here, another player. And if you look at what is being constructed by Chris Beard, I've talked about, and we're going to talk about this other name that you don't know much about, but I'll let you know in just a second. But if you take about what they're constructing, the offensive woes that Ole Miss went through last year, it's kind of gone. That's kind of a past situation. They've added points to where 6 or 7 players that Chris Beard has brought in is going to be in the 70 or 80 points per game range. Now, I understand that's different schools and that's not how they would play together, but that shows that they have the ability to put the ball in the hoop.
Right, and I think, too, okay, in my mind, there were 2 issues that the fan base wound up having with Kermit Davis. Well, I mean, there were more, but 2 specifically that I want to touch on. One, that he wasn't winning enough games, and 2, he wasn't scoring enough points, which led to him not winning enough games, right? Scoring a lot of points in basketball, to me, is the sexier, it attracts more fans, attracts more eyes, that kind of thing. So not only does it obviously make your team better, but it also gets people more engaged. And so I think that it was a smart move, one, to do it, yes, just to make your roster better, but two, it's, fans, when they see that, that's going to make them want to be more engaged with the program, I think. And that may just be my opinion, but that's how I see it.
Yeah, and another name that is making the rounds is Andrew Taylor. He's a point guard out of Marshall, 6'3" guard, 20 points a game, all-conference player. Ole Miss popped up almost immediately for him. Now everybody's trying to get on him. There's a chance it could blow up and kind of get crazy on Ole Miss here, but he's kind of a little bit of a shooter. He kind of fills that void that when you see a bunch of these wing players out there, another shooter on the floor, it could be beneficial. You can see the way that Chris Beard is trying to construct this roster, honestly.
Yeah, which it should be exciting if you're a fan, right? Because I think since I guess it was 19, was that the tournament year? I get confused whether it was 19 or 18. Davis's first year here. Yeah. Since then, it has been, kind of a downhill spiral as far as the basketball program is concerned, because fans just were not engaged anymore. Once they saw that, this team, one, was not going to make the tournament, but two, just wasn't really going to be competitive to even make the tournament. Something in the offseason to spark that interest, okay? Chris Beard's hiring did a lot of that, but now the work that he's doing on the recruiting trail and in the portal, that's just going to add to it.
Yeah, it should be interesting, and season tickets are on sale right now, everybody, if you're listening to this. So contact the ticket office. They can hook you up, because this basketball team is going to be worth watching in the fall, if nothing else. They might not make the tournament. It's not going to be last year.
Oh, yes. And I think that it would be horrendously bad if it was like last year, right? I mean, that's not even remotely the expectation. So,
yeah. Absolutely. Thanks a lot for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Every dayers tomorrow on the show, Derek Vandy Griff. We're going to do a minor league report on Ole Miss Rebel players, because we're going to preview the weekend series against Auburn, but we're trying to find other uses for Derek as well, because it's hit that point in the season where I want him to get more than 70 views, which it was kind of doing that. But anyway, thank you, John, for stopping by. Always a great time to talk to you, man, and we'll talk next week.
All right. Sounds great to me. Thank you, Stephen.
Take care, bud.